Well, good afternoon once again, ladies and gentlemen. We are back again in the city of Alexandria, this time with some historical figures who were actors in the historical drama that was Alexandria, who will present a portrait of themselves and their times. And we will go around more or less in historical order, and each person will give about a 10-minute talk. And then after that, we will begin to open things up for questions and discussion. So first of all, let us begin with Ptolemy I, with the first of the Ptolemaic dynasty, who's portrayed by Kurt Nelson, a physics and engineering instructor here at NIC. And Ptolemy lived in 367 through 283 BC. Ptolemy, if you would, please.
Yes, my name is Ptolemy I. The situation was that in Egypt, the Persians had ruled Egypt for about 200 years. During that time, this was about the 30th dynasty of Egypt. Egypt being a very old country, about 5,000 years BC, from what I'm told, had about 30 dynasties in its rulership. The Persians conquered Egypt and did not like their religious culture, did not rely too much on the priesthood that was established by the Egyptian people. So in so doing, they were welcoming the Egyptian people, were welcoming anyone that would come in and find kindly favor towards them. And these were actually people from the north, people from Greece. The Grecians came in, a few of them, and were emissaries in promoting new ways to fight with the Egyptian armies, and new tools and new ideas. It was a development of commerce, and they were just waiting for the time when the Persians could actually be run out of Egypt. Alexander the Great was a Macedonian who conquered the world at age about 20. He conquered the Persians, and in so doing, he then had control of the whole world, which included Egypt. At that time, he then formulated some generals to go to Egypt, not having a battle there, to take reign of the Egyptians and to establish a new commerce in the world between the East and the West. The Phoenicians around the Mediterranean area, and all of the people from Libya to the west, and the people in the upper Nile found Alexandria, the new city to be founded by Alexander the Great, to be a crossroads between the east and the west. Alexander's mission and dream was, being there a few years, or a few months only, was to establish a new mode of commerce and to rule and govern the Egyptian people. When the Greeks took over, I had the challenge or the task to actually deal with the priesthood. The priesthood was long established for thousands of years. You just don't go in there and realign all the priests and tell them what to do. You have to acknowledge their religion, give them freedom of religious thoughts. They had many gods, gods of animals, gods of planets, gods of the Nile, etc. They had many temples established, some who had kings buried in them from the past, and you give them that freedom. You establish with them the council, a council made up of the priesthood, and then the Greeks, the Greek philosophy of leading. I was a general under Alexander, and I have a pretty good handle on how to deal with administering lots of people. So you had the Greek administration with the priesthood involved. You formulated a council. I first established 6 governors. I chose 2 governors from Macedonia, 2 governors from Egypt, 2 governors from the Greece area, and in so doing, I had a cross-section of governorships. The Macedonian commander then was in charge of the Nile River. The charge then was to rebuild the buildings, to establish freedom of religion and culture, such that Alexandria would be a cosmopolitan region, one full of many kinds of people. Under the priesthood in Egypt were people that were involved with commerce and with dealing with money. And I had to establish taxation, a form of taxing so we could build great edifices, realign the Egyptian temples with Greek facade on the top. You don't haul in rocks for 300 or 400 miles. You just kind of retune up what you have. So we wanted to do that, and also since Alexandria was a dream of Alexander, to have two seaports adjacent, which is two bays, would be a wonderful place to establish a new city. Alexander, by legend, was thought to have gone to the west, to the farmost reaches of Libya to the west, where he received an oracle. The oracle was to make him more than a man, just about a semi-god, and so the Egyptians welcomed this new commander, Alexander. He established me to start the ball rolling, get the buildings going, and deal with the peasants of Egypt. The peasants were the people who did all the work. They did the planting of the crops, waited for the Nile to flood every year. You had to believe in your local astronomers to when the Nile will flood, so you waited for, guess what, the sun to come up in Regulus, the royal constellation of a lion. So you have to know when these happen and coordinate all of this. Under the peasants was another class of people in Egypt at that time, and they were called slaves. And the slaves are Nubians from the south, from Ethiopia. And we actually dealt real well with our slaves. In our homes were small chairs and stools, slaves. You also married within the family. A lot of uncles married nieces. And women were treated with equality at this time. Contracts were written up by those who could write hieroglyphics. And the Greek form, which later came into being, the Greek language also infused into the Egyptian culture. We didn't want to change the culture a lot, but we believed in contracts, equality of women. When there's a divorce or a separation, you have goods exchanged. We had a lot of ideas which we thought were developed through the 4,000 years of being there. The Greeks then wanted to establish Alexandria as a commerce center and to make this a world center, a second capital of the Greek kingdom of the world. We had no intentions of raping the land or doing more than just taking taxes to perform our task of retrofitting the buildings to establish the delta as a beautiful place to live, because the giver of life was the Nile River, of course, which flooded yearly. We had to have some lead time for people to build up their towns, get the levees ready, and to lift the water and to start a new life. It was a wonderful place to visit by other people in the Mediterranean region. They came to look at the temples that the Egyptians had made. And so what we wanted to do was to blend in the cultures. We tolerated different religions. We tolerated different lifestyles. And we had, actually, toleration was our big thing to build a cosmological city. The Greek influence then had a big bearing in blending in with the Egyptian society, not changing it, but actually merging in and blending with it. I lived to be about 83 years old, if I can remember that far back, and I died of old age. I had a son, Ptolemy II, that married his sister, which is common in those days, and we ruled again that you could marry within families. That's okay if you're royalty. And Ptolemy II was very aggressive in building programs, and the system flourished for about 400 years at my instigation. I was cognizant of that because I was buried in a temple somewhere there, and I have an afterlife, and I had a lot of things buried with me, and so I was cognizant of the followings of other Ptolemaic kings. The last of the Ptolemaic kings during the Greek rule is present on our stage today, and she, Cleopatra, was the last of the Ptolemaic line, the dynasties of the Ptolemy reign. Thereafter, I've been told that these other folks have been from another country that I wasn't really aware of, but formed later, called Rome. So during this interim, Egypt was about 3,000 or 4,000 years. The Persians came in and dominated, weren't well liked at all, were cast out by Alexander the Great. I came in, tried to establish Greek administration, using the priesthood as my mechanism, dealing with those in commerce, which are those who could write, those who could deal with money, commerce, and goods. I had to deal with the peasants of Egypt. You had a lot of peasants. They lived in cities and little spaces about, I guess in your way of reckoning, it would be 8 feet by 12 feet. You had a column in the middle of the house, and you did all of your work there and put all these buildings together in a big blob, and you called it a community. Some of these people could raise grain, and they could deal with making oils, which was exported from Egypt, and papyrus, which is exported as a type of instrument that you could write on. And then we also had people to make these edifices that, of course, were Greek transference, and also I need a place to be buried in. So you have to have no freedom of speech, but you have to have obligatory jobs to do. So everyone was busy, everyone had a task, and it's my job then as Ptolemy #1 to oversee this for Alexander. I don't know if you remember or not, but Alexander was 20 years old, went to India, became ill and died, and then his body was brought back to Alexandria and buried. I know where that place was, but I guess today no one knows where it is, and I hear rumors that they might have found Alexander's tomb. So in Alexander's honor and in his vision, by receiving the oracle at Libya, I have been in charge of the Egyptian people, one of the cosmological infusions of the Greeks, the idea of administering, not changing their religions, whatever ones they had, whichever gods whether it was Isis or Osiris or Huru. This metal here, this is the sun, and this is the god of Re, R-E, and this was the god, I was the son of Re, an omen that I received from Alexander, and this is his symbol, that he was a son of the sun. Of course we know the sun rides up in the east and rises through the constellations, and is a giant chariot that carries the gods across the sky. And that is a common knowledge, we all know that. And whatever god we worship, whether it's the Nile, the giver of water, a cow, whatever you have, go to that temple and offer your sacrifices for that religion. So we're very tolerant of religion, equality of women, commerce, and the recognition that even though we have slaves, we have a stratification that we have to deal with all these people at the same time. I wish to thank the audience for allowing me to say a few words.
Thank you. Our next speaker is B.J. Johnson, who's an NIC student, and he will be portraying Julius Caesar, who lived between 83 and 30 B.C.
Thank you, old wise ones. My birth name is Gaius Julius Caesar. I was born in Subura. I'm going to give you a brief overview of my remarkable life. I was able to accomplish a lot. In these days, you have to understand that everything was done for political rise, or there was a political reason for any and everything that was done. At my point in time, my parents, I was the last of the Julii, and I originally, I guess you would say, destination or destiny was to be in the priesthood. So in '87 was when I received my nomination to the priesthood. At the time, I was seeing a young lady, and the only way that I could keep my nomination for the priesthood, I had to marry someone of political standing. So that is when I married Cinna's daughter, Cornelia. Because of the tyrant, or should I say dictator, Sulla at the time, excuse me, I have to think back quite a few years. I was sent over to, I guess you guys call it modern day Turkey, we called it back then Asia, to assist the governor there. Most folks have been asking me since I've been here in North Idaho what this crown symbolizes. This is actually an award. It's a civic crown, and usually you could get it, it's sort of like your military ribbons nowadays, and this is my military ribbon. I received this crown as an act of bravery in Lesbos. Around '77 is when I started giving speeches for prosecution, and what I mean by that is in order to somewhat get notoriety as an orator, you had to sometimes make accusations towards people in high positions as far as bribery, as far as anything unethical, and sometimes you didn't always win the seat, but you did get noticed as someone who would speak up. So that's when I started doing that. My early oration had a lot to be desired. In '73, I became an official member of the Board of Priests. In '72 is when I really started my military campaign in Rome. And I was sent to many battles, and my most famous battle was, as you all may have heard, were the Gallic Wars. And basically I was sent over there to really try to keep the peace by the Senate. But one thing led to another, and I really wasn't ready for the advanced fighting that was going on there, so it ended up consuming 8 years of my life, the Gallic Wars. I was ordered to come back by the Senate, but I did not, for personal reasons or for political reasons or what have you. In '63 was when I was appointed Pontifex Maximus, and that was the high priest of the people of Jupiter. And that was basically where my parents wanted me to be, and years later, they were finally able to see it actually come through. Throughout my life, surrounded by good friends and good women, I really made a lot of silly mistakes. One, I ended up trying to, as you all may have heard the rumor, having relations with Queen Cleopatra, who was, let me speak frankly, was a very smart woman, a very intelligent woman. You see where she descended from. And she was basically there to try to keep her place of Egypt afloat. She had many things to offer me. She had amethysts that went for good sale value. She had the production of corn, and not to mention she's pretty hot on the eye. And at this time, trying to gain political upright, trying to move up the political ladder was a real insult. And even though I am a Roman, and even though you could get divorced and married for political reasons, this was more of a slap in the face. And it later on came to haunt me. Mark Antony, good buddy of mine, was actually a lieutenant under me. And once the Senate started getting to the point where they were getting fed up with my disrespect and rebellion, actually brought forth my ultimatums to them in 49 BC before the table. It was shortly after that Pompey and I started really going after each other, and we were given an ultimatum to disband our armies. We tried to come up with an ultimatum between ourselves, but at that time the Senate were the word of the land, and he was put in a position where he had to do what they told him to do. So this ensued our civil war. He and I went back and forth for 19 months, and I was finally able to be victorious over him. The first battle that we had was in Italy, I believe. This is a long time ago. Forgive me for my inaccuracy on dates, but I want to try to get all in there. And I was able to really come down on him pretty hard, and he fled to Albania, I believe. And the bad thing was the Senate left also, and they left the bank. Well, free money, And but the thing was, I didn't really pursue him. I wasn't consistent, so I didn't keep on pursuing him. Henceforth, he was able to go to Macedonia, I believe it was, and become stronger and to regroup. And we finally, as you all would say, had it out, and I was proven victorious. He was later allegedly killed by his own men in Egypt. In '54, a great deal happened to me. That was the death of my daughter, Julia. And at the time, Pompey was married to Julia, and that threw a serious blow to me. In '51, the Gallic Wars ended, and at this point in time, years later, I was able to be deemed dictator for life, which back in those days, explain quickly, the Senate, you were nominated on a one-year basis, and I would always try to break that and try to get more time. And at the time, I was also trying to get a seat on the Senate, but there was this rule that you had to wait 10 years to be nominated for that position. Well, dreadfully, in 44 BC, March 6th, better known as the Ides of March, good old Marcus Brutus, Gaius Cassius, Decimus Brutus, and Gaius Trebonius decided that I was, as you would say, a steak, and decided to cut me up. I don't apologize for anything that I've done. I believe that I was a speaker of the people. I tried to do everything I could for the people. As far as the military that was under me, I tried to double their pay. I reinstated the tribune's speech, that's what they are. They're the mouths of the tribe, which was knocked out of commission during the reign of Sulla. Many misunderstand me, may say that I'm flamboyant and arrogant, but I was actually for the people. And as far as my two good friends back here, I hold no grudge. We were all out to take care of what we felt needed to be done. And this was a short, I guess you would say layman's terms, quick to the point of Julius Caesar. If you need anything else, I'll be on the side to let you know. Thanks.
Our next speaker is Dawn Atwater Haight, who is the director of the NIC Foundation's Alumni Association, and she is obviously portraying Cleopatra, who lived, there's some discrepancy about the dates, at least as I have them here. I suspect that's controversy about historical dating at that period because, as was pointed out this morning, there was a change in the calendar at that time. So there may be some discrepancies on sources that way. But as I have it, Cleopatra lived from 69 to 30 BC.
Thank you. Caesar, thank you for what you have to say.
No problem.
I would say good afternoon, but it is not a good afternoon, so why should I say it? It is another March, and March has never been a good month for me. I would say that I am in great despair. In fact, I carry with me something that can be used at any moment. I would like to tell you about myself and tell you why I'm in such despair. As Caesar alluded, I've had nothing but trouble for the last several years. Nothing but trouble. It started with Caesar's death. I had a perfectly good man, had a son by him, Caesarion. And what happens, a friend of his goes and kills him when I'm in Rome. So I go back to Alexandria. And I'm there for a while. And I'm happy there, but I also am very afraid of Rome, because Rome has never been a friend of Egypt's. But Mark Antony, he does show up. I have met him in Rome before, and he shows up, and we begin to talk and have conversation and begin to realize that, first of all, he begins to respect me. He realizes that I could be a good partner in what he has in mind. Isn't that true? Yes. He doesn't see me as the floozy that the rest of the world might have. And in that respect, we begin to think about a little plan. Little plan? Yes. The little plan is one where we are going to make Alexandria the center of the world as we know it. Now, up to this point, of course, we have Rome in that position, but so we go about with a little plan. And the little plan includes taking over and bringing Rome to their knees and putting Alexandria in place and making Mark and Mark, excuse me, or whatever, the center of this thing. And I also have a son, Caesarion, who of course is from the line of Caesar. This whole thing would work out very nicely, but it didn't. Octavia is on to us. We have a small battle called Actium that's outside of Greece and the waters there in the Mediterranean, and he traps us in, and I'm looking to get away, and Mark follows, but of course we're not a happy bunch here now. We're back in Alexandria tied in, no place to go. What are we going to do? Mark, who has divorced one wife over me, is really caught. He has no place to return to. He's desperate. What does he do? He kills himself. He thinks I killed myself, and he goes ahead and kills himself. What a dilemma. Of course I didn't kill myself for him. Do I look like the type who would do that? No, I doubt it. So, anyway, to make a long story short, he comes to find me, and he dies in my arms. Now, I liked Mark. Believe me, I did like Mark. I had four or five children? Five, excuse me. I have trouble with that. I had one of his, and it gets complicated. However, Mark and I had a partnership, and people always wanted to see it as everything I did was an erotic adventure. Well, I can tell you, I didn't get to be a strategist for nothing. I had a plan, and always did have a plan. Now that brings me to why I stand here, and why you might sense a little anger in my voice, because I am most concerned, quite honestly, about what people will say to me when I take this ask to my breast. What will they say? Will they take the duo of the two chauvinisms, race and sex, and turn me into a floozy? Turn me into some kind of emotional sex kitten? I want you to listen up, because you are the people out there that can make the difference for how I am portrayed in the future. Storytellers are never so innocent, and you will be the storytellers, but you will also be propagandists. And don't you forget it, we're all propagandists when we tell a story. Right? Quiet, aren't you? Okay, well, I want to tell you the 4 or 5 things I'm about. So when I take this ask to my breast, you will know the truth. 1, I am Greek. That is what I came to be. A Ptolemy was always a Greek. I was the 13th in a line following my dear great-great-great-great-great-great something grandfather. Okay, secondly, I hate to say it, but terribly bright. Not just bright, terribly bright. I learned 10 languages. 10 languages. I can list them, but you probably wouldn't even know some of them. But the bottom line is that I had a pretty good control of my brain power, which no one has really suggested a great deal. Okay, I also cared desperately about Egypt. I learned the Demotic language, not for something of a bored way to do because I didn't have any needlepoint to do. I did it because I loved my people. So I was a strategist. Thirdly, fourthly, or wherever we are here, I was a strategist who believed that I had to be more than what my father was, who was an appeaser. My father, in generations before him, went around appeasing the Romans. I had a better idea. Why not conquer them? Why should you appease someone when you can conquer them? That made no sense to me. So anyway, I'm trying to get across to you who I am and what I'm about. So when time goes by and my body decays, or whatever happens to me when I leave from here, you'll be able to tell the story as it really is, and to remember about history, and try to make history the truth of truths, not the something of something happening, but the truth. History has a way with people's prejudices of changing, and I want you to be my storytellers.
Thank you, Cleopatra.
You're welcome.
Our next speaker will be Mark Antony, who will be portrayed by Niels Rosdahl, who is an NIC journalism instructor and our fearless Sentinel leader as well. Please, thank you.
The theme for my compatriots here today has been what they accomplished for the world. Man, I thought and thought. I couldn't think of anything that I accomplished for the world. But because of my skills, I was a tremendous catalyst for what Roman Julius Caesar and Egyptian Cleopatra accomplished with their lives. And I also was the setup man for a long string of Roman emperors that led the world to civilization. My life was interesting enough that some fairly learned men wrote volumes and volumes about me. Shakespeare, Plutarch, Dryden, to name a few. Did you realize that myself, Cleopatra, and Julius actually were all Greek? Our ancestors had been sent to Roman provinces to rule, and we ended up inheriting those positions. I was born in 83 BC in Rome. I had problems as a teenager. I drank a lot, I caroused a lot. I was a pretty wild kid, so my parents did like lots of U.S. families do today. They sent me to a military school in Greece. But there was a secret at this school. They also were tremendous educators in oratory skills. And this is what I used to help save our civilization as we knew it at that time. I was extremely lucky in my possessions, both personally and professionally. Like Richard Burton, who was a lucky guy to portray me in one of the movies about me, I was a handsome hunk. I was well educated. I was very kind. I was personable. I was very athletic. And I was wealthy. I was very good at combining all of this into a skill of using people. And I let them think that they were using me. My success as a general was twofold. Number one, I was a very wily militarist. And number two, my men loved me. I exercised with the lowest men in the army. I fought with them. I drank with them. I might have even done more with them, huh, Caesar? At any rate, this might be why Caesar loved me. I'm not sure that I loved Caesar, but I knew that for my own survival, that his murderers could not take over the leadership of the Roman Empire. So using my oratory skills, I gave that famous "Friend, Roman countrymen" speech. As a result, Brutus never was able to take over the leadership of the Roman Empire. Instead, I was one of a triumvirate that took over. Government life to a wild guy like me was pretty boring. So I disguised myself as a commoner, and I went drinking with the common people. That's why when I got here to North Idaho, I got myself this hat. Last night I had a great time drinking with the fellows over at the Fort Ground Tavern, and they didn't even talk about my miniskirt. All this week I've noticed lots of the fellows in the audience in this auditorium have worn a cap even when they're indoors. So I decided, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, and when in North Idaho, do as the North Idahoans do. Back in Rome, however, I lost popularity quickly. I had a habit of vomiting with a hangover in front of the Senate. I fooled around with everybody else's wives, including my own, with whom I had 5 children, with Fulvia and Octavia. But they were unhappy with me, and sensing this, I didn't like Rome anyway. So I, as one of the triumvirate, I choose to rule the empire's eastern provinces. Greece, Turkey, Egypt, to name a few. So I went to Egypt. That's when I met her. I'll never forget it. She came on a golden barge up this river. Purple sails billowed, filled with perfume. Oarmen had silver oars, and they oared them to the tune of flutes and harps. Very handsome, scantily clad boys fanned her, and she laid under a canopy, clad only in a silken golden sheen over her naked and very shapely body. I was smitten, I'll admit it. We spent 14 years together, Cleo and I. Together. She wouldn't leave me alone. We fished together, hunted together. I tried to do military things, and she'd come and join me doing that too. I couldn't get away from her. We disguised ourselves as commoners, and we went drinking with the people. I thought that would be below her, but she loved it. On one of our fishing trips, I decided to try to impress her. And so I had my slaves swim underneath the boat and attach some beautiful fish to my line, and I pulled them up. Oh, God, she was impressed. But she actually knew. And the next time we went fishing, my slaves went under the water again. But from the other end of the river, her slaves went under the water, got rid of my slaves, and attached a giant gross ocean fish to the line, and I pulled it up thinking I was proud when there was this real gross thing. Everybody had a great laugh, including me. That was one of the things I could do, was laugh at myself. Cleo and I tried to outdo each other with lavish goings-on. One of my chefs told a story about that I used to have him have 8 boars cooking at one time for a table of only 4 people. And the reason was because the chefs never knew when I might call for the feast to be served. And so they had to have 1 boar exactly perfect at any certain time. Well, my Roman wife, Octavia, and her brother, Octavian, who eventually became the Emperor Augustus, they tired of all of our lavish spending. And so we warred with them. We battled them for many years. My soldiers also became tired of my exploits, especially a little process that I called decimation. Decimation is a word that you guys have misused for centuries. What decimation actually was the dividing up of an army into groups of 10 men each. And then I would have 1 out of every 10 killed as a show of power. They didn't like that. Although I was strongest in land warfare, at Cleo's insistence, our final battle with Rome was on the water. I thought we were winning, but all of a sudden I turn around and her ships and Cleo herself are gone. I was very forsaken. I was beaten. Somebody told me that she had killed herself. So I took my own sword and tried to kill myself, but I wasn't successful. So my very wounded body was brought to Alexandria, where she had built a giant monument to herself. She was up there in the top, but she wouldn't open the door because she thought that Octavian's armies would come in. And so her servants hauled me up the tower outside by using a rope and pulley system. Finally, when I saw she was still alive, I died. What could I do? When I died, she knew that she was doomed. She knew that she would be brought to trial in Rome, and so she took that little golden snake she has, and that was it for Cleo too. Did we accomplish much? That's for you to decide. But Shakespeare said that we were the most famous couple ever to be buried together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark Antony, and all of the tragic threesome here. Next, we move several hundred years ahead of time toward the change between the classic period of the Roman Empire that you've just been learning about to a time after Christianity has been both introduced to the Roman Empire and has been declared the official religion of the Roman Empire. And there are many interesting events taking place in this time period, which is the time of Hypatia, probably the greatest female intellectual of the ancient world, who was a philosopher and mathematician and holder of the chair of philosophy at the Museon, as I mentioned this morning. And she lived from 370 to about 415 AD. And she will be portrayed by Linda Erickson, who is the English and Foreign Language Division Secretary. Hypatia.
Good afternoon. I'm Hypatia. I have traveled over 1,600 years to come to you today here in your museum and with your great library. Although I lived in Alexandria, I'm a Greek woman. My father was Theon, who also held the chair of philosophy and mathematics at the Museon in Alexandria. And he taught me everything he knew. By the time I was 18, I knew what my father knew, and I argued with him and said, "What you are presenting as facts are suppositions," and he had to admit I was right. From that time, I traveled forth into the world, into the educational centers of the world at that time, and I studied with the great teachers, the great philosophers. I taught in Athens, but I came back to Alexandria and the great library that so many years ago had been started by Ptolemy I, one of my heroes. Another hero of mine was Plotinus, a man who developed the thoughts and ideas of Neoplatonism based on the later metaphysical ideas of Plato. And I taught these in the museum, and I taught them in the streets, and I taught them in the chambers of the learned people. Although I was married, I remained a virgin all of my life because my passion was learning and philosophy. It was this passion that brought me to an untimely end. But before we talk about that, I would like to share with you some of my ideas about thought and bring you into that and think about it for your day and your time. Neoplatonism is a progressive philosophy and does not expect to state final conditions to men whose minds are finite. Life is an unfoldment, and the further we travel, the more truth we can comprehend. To understand the things that are at our door is the best way to prepare for understanding the things that are beyond. There are two kinds of thought: new thought and second-hand thought. New thought is made up of thoughts you yourself think. The other kind is supplied to you by jobbers. The distinguishing feature of new thought is its antiquity. Of necessity, it is older than second-hand thought. All genuine new thought is true for the person who thinks it. It only turns sour and becomes error when not used, and when the owner forces another to accept it. It then becomes a second-hand revelation. And second-hand revelations are errors half sold with stupidity and healed with greed. Very often, we are inspired to think by others, but in our hearts, we have the new thought. And the person, the book, the incident merely remind us that it is already ours. New thought is always simple. Second-hand thought is obtuse, complex, patched, peculiar, costly, and is passed out to be accepted, not understood. That no one comprehends it is often regarded as a recommendation. New thought holds all things lightly, gently, easily, even thought. It works for a healthy circulation and tends to health, happiness, and well-being now and hereafter. It does not believe in violence, force, coercion, or resentment, because all these things react on the doer. It has faith that all men, if not interfered with by other men, will eventually evolve new thought and will do for themselves what is best and right, beautiful and true. New thought considers only the user. To know thyself is all there is of it. When a creator of new thought goes into the business of retailing his product, he often forgets to live it, and as soon is transformed into a dealer of second-hand thought. This is the way all purveyors in second-hand revelation begin. In their anxiety to succeed, they call in the police. The blessing that is compulsory is not wholly good, and any system of morals which has to be forced on us is immoral. New thought is free thought. Its penalty is responsibility. You either have to live it or else lose it. Its reward is freedom. For instance, thou shalt not make unto thyself any graven image is second-hand thought. The first man who said it may have known what he meant, but surely it is nothing to us. However, that does not keep us from piously repeating it, having our children memorize it. We model in clay or wax and carve if we can, and give honors to those who do, and this as well. This commandment is founded on the fallacy that graven images are gods, whatever that is. The command adds nothing to our happiness, nor does it shape our conduct, nor influence our habits. Everybody knows and admits its futility, yet we are unable to eliminate it from our theological system. It is strictly second-hand. Worse, it is junk. Conversely, the admonition, "Be gentle and keep your voice low," is new thought, since all but savages know its truth, comprehend its import, and appreciate its excellence. Dealers in second-hand thought always declare that theirs is the only genuine and all other is spurious and dangerous. Dealers in new thoughts say, "Take this only as it appeals to you as your own. Accept it all, or in part, or reject it all. And in any event, do not believe it merely because I say so." New thought is founded on the laws of your own nature, and its shibboleth is, "Know thyself." Second-hand thought is founded on authority, and its war cry is, "Pay and obey." These are just a few thoughts that I've brought to you today. It was about 100 years during my lifetime that Christianity had been the official religion of the Holy Roman Empire. It was politics and religion that ended my life. I was well regarded by the citizens of Alexandria. I sat in chambers with the rulers and advised them. And it was this honor done to me, a lecturer at the museum, that instigated the events that led to my death. Cyril, later Saint Cyril, was the bishop of Alexandria, and he very much wanted to form a friendship with Orestes, who was the political leader, the governor of Alexandria. Orestes and I were great friends. He was a wonderful man. He applauded my lectures, and he took them to heart and ruled justly and wisely. This created envy in the heart of Cyril, and he was heard by Peter, a reader and magistrate in Alexandria, to say that he would not be sorry if I were not such a great influence on Orestes. So one day, as I traveled in my carriage home from the museum from lecturing, a crowd, a mob of Nitrian monks waylaid my carriage, took me from my carriage to a nearby church to force me to recant the heresy that I taught. Once there, things went out of hand quite rapidly, and the people there were incited to take sharp shells and shards of pottery, and hack me to pieces. They then took my poor mutilated body to Cinaron and there burned it. Orestes was furious. He resigned his position in protest at the treatment that I had received. But the officials gave out that I had not been killed. I had moved off to Athens. And Cyril nominated his choice for the new governor of Alexandria, who was confirmed. And so ended my life and began the 1,000 years that you now know as the Dark Ages. Thank you.
Thank you, Hypatia. Finally, for some comments and reflections, our earlier honored speaker, Rabbi Simeon Ben Ezra, will give some comments and reflections on the things that he's been hearing.
My comments and reflections are necessarily brief, having been a long day. I can only say there's much of interest in what Hypatia has to say about the difference between secondhand thought and new thought. There is much to be discussed or explored there. But all in all, for all of us, it seems clear to me that at my time in Alexandria, and perhaps for all of us for all time, the struggle for wisdom is a constant one, and it is never in overabundance. and the lack of it yields the kind of experiences that many of us have recounted today. I would simply ask that then we think in terms of wisdom as we go through our lives, and let that provide a counterbalance to all the other experiences and emotions that may come our way. Thank you.
Well, that concludes the formal presentations that we have. As you can hear, especially those of you who've been through the whole day, Alexandria was a fascinating city that played a pivotal role in the development of Western civilization as we now know it. What I'd like to do at this point is to open up the floor to any questions that any of you may have. Well, excuse me, I think before I do that, let's try to tie it in with the earlier debate to see if any of you have any thoughts or comments concerning this question of censorship and free expression of speech, which is a vital issue in our time. If anyone has any comments about that. Yes, please, Ptolemy.
I would like to comment on this new word called free speech. In my country, when I was reigning there, we had what was called toleration. Toleration of religions, toleration of equality of male versus female. If you had free speech on the street, that was okay as long as you did not condemn the rulers or the governors that oversaw the province that was their charge. We had to have some degree of censorship in the way of getting the job done, building temples, keeping the food supply going, feeding the masses, feeding the servants of all of our peoples in Egypt. Even the slaves had to be fed. So I think that censorship had to be a little bit in place, and free speech was allowable as long as it didn't interfere with the master plan.
I don't think I'm going to ask the Romans, but perhaps Hypatia has some thoughts on this.
Toleration was something that was very important to the different cultures who were gathered together in Alexandria. And we were used to being able to hold forth about our ideas. We lived quite comfortably with the Jewish people. We lived quite comfortably, to a point, with the Christians, and certainly with the Greek and Roman gods. And we felt free to follow and express any philosophy that we felt persuaded to follow.
Well, now let's see if there are any questions from the audience. You can ask anything of anyone that may connect with the theme of the debate and the response panel's comments with regard to it, or anything at all that comes to mind. And yes, please do come to the microphone so that we can hear you.
My question is to General Ptolemy first. Forgive my ignorance, Your Excellency, but I desire to know, after Alexander reached India, leaving conquered behind Turkey, Persia, land of Turkmen, my people, when and how did Alexander Macedonski's empire lost its power over that part of the world?
Alexander died at a young age in India, and his power decreased fairly fast, but he had a lot of generals establish themselves in all of the countries to maintain control of the Grecian influence on those countries. Egypt was of primary importance. The Persian Empire itself, I think, was left to just be on their own cognizance. India was just on the edge of India, was a new country and a new land, new tribal exploration to the Silk Route to the east. And so the infusion of Greece only went thus far, just a few hundreds or thousands of miles, and I think he withdrew and then let other people rule themselves. But his main concern was around the Mediterranean and the Near East and to the Grecian and Macedonian regions.
So even though he got a wife from Samarkand, Uzbekistan, he didn't have any children, did he?
No, he did not. He had generals, and he actually had Alexander IV, a son. And I don't recall his whole family situation, but I know he did have the one son called Alexander IV, which is the third ruler of Egypt at that time, and it's a quick rule.
Any other questions? Well, once again, I'll throw one out here to see if there are any bites. Reflecting back on your lives and the times that you lived, and having been visitors in our time and presumably taking in a bit of the news, are there any contemporary issues that you've been looking in on that you might have some thoughts or comments on from the perspective of your times? Any advice?
I have advice. Do not let them censor your libraries. One of the great tragedies of Alexandria were several actually in connection with the great library there. And that was the burning of part of it during some of Caesar's machinations, quite by accident, but still manuscripts were lost. And then after my death, the library was utterly destroyed. It took 6 months for them to burn all the manuscripts. They were used to heat the bathwater for the public baths in Alexandria. And then all that knowledge collected from all over the known world was gone.
Yes, I could add to that. Certainly, considering my dilemma and the way that history has betrayed me, one of the lessons that I would certainly want to caution you to is to learn to be a critical thinker. You will read a great deal about people and things and events and times, and if you take them for what you see constantly without being critical, you can come to some pretty amazing conclusions. Go back and study and analyze and think and talk and evaluate your decisions.
The comment I'd like to make is if you look in the past, you're actually pretending like you're looking at the future. To develop new ideas, as mentioned by Hypatia, and to generate new technologies or new thrusts to move mankind or the human species to a forefront of settlement on Mars, or whether we make a conquest of the moon, to find out why we exist and where we're going, it does require reflection looking back. And the more that people look back, I think the more knowledgeable and the more what was mentioned, the wisdom we would have to make intelligent decisions for the future. These people sitting here dealt with a dilemma in Alexandria, which was regionalized and localized. You didn't have mass communications and new technologies to deal with. You folks in the audience here are here because you want to learn more about the past, learn more about the characters that existed that you heard about in various books or TV shows, etc. To reflect back in the past, to preserve your libraries, to preserve the heritage of great thinkers of the past, is a charge that we can all give to our children and to our grandchildren. And I would like to charge each one of you in the audience to try to project history as a favorable influence on your thoughts of tomorrow.
I guess that one thing that I'd like to bring out that was both the success and the downfall of Mark Antony can be passed on as advice. He wasn't born into royalty. Caesar and Cleopatra were born into royalty. Mark Antony was born into a wealthy family, but not royalty. What made him successful was that he was very sensitive and empathetic to the needs of the populace. He would visit the sick and the wounded soldiers and their families, and he would do things with them, as I said earlier. And sometimes, as he got more power, the only way he could do this was by disguising himself. What brought his downfall was when he quit being sensitive to the needs of the common people, and they rebelled against him, and of course, he ended up dead, and the empire at that time, as it was known, died.
One last thing, responding to your thoughts on how we understand the past and how we view it. I would know in our country, especially, this would be something I think of importance. Ask you to critically reconsider, though, the importance of tradition in human life and the importance of tradition in relationship to some of the deeper truths that we all are called to experience.
Please.
One thing that I would like to reiterate, as Cleopatra said earlier, is one thing, you have to learn history in order to avoid repeating it. We made a lot of mistakes in your eyes and in our own eyes. Some of us with thinking that we were doing one thing and we were actually swaying towards the other. One thing that I've noticed, I've been able to look through some of your archives and through your libraries, and by the way, I'm sorry, it wasn't anything personal with the library. I'm sure you've heard it before, but if you don't learn history, if you don't learn from the mistakes that we make, you will repeat it. And in your modern day society, as I'm starting to see, you're starting to make a big circle back. You're actually regressing. A lot of things that you were able to address and deal with back maybe in the late 60s, late 50s, you're now turning back towards them. You folks are getting ready to go into the second millennium, and we need to learn from history in order to avoid going back and keep repeating the same cycle, because life is a big cycle, and if you don't learn from it and actually, as I would like to say, as you all would say, break the chain, you're going to keep on repeating it. And that's one thing that I would like to really push upon all of you. Learn from the past, learn from the mistakes, learn from the triumphs, learn what worked, and actually try to make things better. That way you don't repeat it.
Thank you. Worthy comments all. We have a question.
Yes.
Good.
Actually, I would just like a response. I read in the newspaper recently, and I believe it is Ann Fox who is trying to introduce into the Idaho school system a vocational program doing away with science, history, and such subjects like that. So when you go through high school, you don't get a diploma and essentially choose what your career is going to be. You go through high school knowing that at the end of high school you're going to become a welder or such. And I would just like a response to that.
I'd like to respond to that.
Follow me, please.
When you take a subject and isolate it and say, this is a history class, and you shut your mind off, and then you go to another class, and this is a geography class, you shut your mind off, and then you go into a math class. I think the best way to teach a class is if you teach science, you should also include, in addition to the science techniques or methodologies, the history or the development of science. When you teach industrial or vocational or technical programs, you should also increase the knowledge of technology as a formulative basis for where we fit in. So to be all pervasive, you should have history in every class, you should have math in every class, et cetera, and not get really too upset if somebody jerks one class out, but try to encourage other teachers to incorporate the whole. I myself in astronomy class teach a lot of history of the world through astronomy and technology. I find students love that section of the course because they've never heard a teacher talk about the history of the world in terms of something other than battles or dates of famous rulers. So to look at in the background a course and say, well, I think I'll turn off now and go to another class is dangerous. And I think the young minds that we have today need the infusion of many disciplines in one course, no matter what they call it, as a learned experience.
I'd go just a step farther and say that, of course, you need more education, not less. And I don't know what she would be implying, but it would appear that you should enrich yourself. If something like that should happen in your school system, then you go ahead yourself and you go after the things you know you need. And if you can stop people from isolating you from learning, you certainly should.
From what I've heard panic about Coeur d'Alene School District's decision to, as it was in the headlines, make you think that they might be eliminating some specific courses such as geography or history or even computers. But I think you need to look into this further rather than panic, and you might find that they aren't eliminating anything. What they're doing is making it so you still take the first courses in this, and then if you want to take advanced courses, it's your choice. And that way you have more options open to you of other advanced subjects as well.
Please.
My question is primarily for Hypatia, but anybody else is welcome to respond as well. Free speech has come a long way since your time, and I was wondering, where do we draw the line between censorship and the route that free speech has taken today?
Hypatia would advise you to take what you wish, all or part, or leave it all. If you are a self-censorer, that's your right to have new thought. When my idea of what I think you should read, what I think you should say, is imposed on you, then I become guilty of secondary thought. I am imposing my will on you rather than allowing you to develop your thoughts. When any religion or philosophy or body of people feels that they must create a police state in order to enforce what is judged to be right to think, right to read, right to speak, then we lose our freedoms, not only as individuals, but as a people.
We have time for one more.
This question is for all of the historical characters. When you all were younger and getting educated and being brought up to be famous philosophers and warriors and leaders and tyrants, from the view that you look, from the way you look at the education system in this country at the present time, and you also saw the education system at your own times, what kind of suggestions can you give to inspire young people at this time to study, to learn more?
I think that one of the things that helped us back then is that there wasn't any really set curriculum back then, so a teacher could really be as free and as expressive as he wanted to be. I think that teachers have a ridiculously hard and almost impossible task nowadays with you have to teach this, you have to teach that, you have this curriculum to follow. Back then, when I was being taught in oratory skills and then as far as philosophy and everything else, I was able to get the teachers his full knowledge without having to worry about any boundaries or any limits or anything such as that. And I think that a teacher should be able to, I guess, break the curriculum and be able to expand and really put the knowledge that they want to put into someone's head instead of having to wait for the next chapter to begin.
So what you're saying is those times it was more up to students, to the guys who want to be educated, to pick up the knowledge and to...
I'm saying that, and I'm also saying that the teachers were able to really go all out, as you would say, and really teach you all the way out. There wasn't any set standards as far as what things that had to be taught. And as far as, this, that, or the other. They were able to tell you about the stars and tell you about the galaxies, and they were able to tell you about the different phases of philosophy, or they were able to teach you about the different this and that of whatever.
You have to keep in mind, in the ancient times, most people were groveling for food and trying to manage their life. There were very few or select few that were able to become educated. In my country of Egypt, there was a class of educated people who could write in mud or on papyrus and make contracts for marriages or make contracts for commerce, but those were very few. And to study very diligently and hard for that special class of people was only given to a certain few. I'm always amazed when I read your information on your educational system that you're trying to educate the masses here in the United States, which to me seems to be a very, very difficult challenge.
Hypatia, on the other hand, taught the people in the streets. Any commoner who wanted to listen was certainly welcome to do so.
I think we are at the end of our allotted time, and this concludes the conversations and explorations of issues and ideas for today. I invite all of you to return tomorrow to hear at 10:30 Thomas Jefferson, who will be portrayed by Dr. Clay Jenkinson, who you heard this morning. And if you haven't heard him do Thomas Jefferson, you've really missed something, and you've got another opportunity to do it. So I really encourage you to come. It will be an unforgettable experience. And thank you all very much for coming today. Thank you.